Hey, it's Jason from Strength Running, and I'm taking some questions from podcast listeners. And I got a great one from JT, who has a question about tune-up races. A lot of us schedule tune-up races during our training cycle as we get ready for our ultimate goal, the goal race, the A race. But when it comes to those tune-up races, should we put them in place of our long runs? Should we do long runs the day after the tune-up race? How should we think about this, and what's the strategy? This is an excellent question because this really goes to the heart of effective training. How do you prepare for your goal race while also slightly prioritizing these tune-up races along the way? Because tune-up races are a fantastic way of helping you practice the skill of racing, and they really do give you a very good snapshot of your fitness level at that moment in time. So they can help you better plan for your ultimate goal race. So if you do really well in a tune-up race, well, now you may want to adjust your goal race plans and maybe be a little bit more aggressive. So I'm a big fan of tune-up races. I like scheduling them strategically and racing them at 100% effort so that we can get a good estimate of our fitness level. But what happens to our long runs? Do we simply have to abandon the long run and do it the next week? What should happen here? So obviously my answer to this question is it depends. It depends on what race you're training for. It depends on the distance of your tune-up race. So let's go through a couple examples here. Let's say you're training for a marathon and you have a half marathon tune-up race planned about a month before the marathon. Should you do a long run that weekend? In this case, I say no. I say let's treat that half marathon tune-up race as your long run. Because if you're doing, say, a 2-mile warm-up and a 2-mile warm-down, which I think you should, then you're getting in over 17 miles of running for the day. That is enough. You've already run 17 miles, more than 17 miles. I don't think we have to do a traditional, more formal long run the next day. Besides, you're going to be really sore, you're going to be tired, you're going to need some recovery after an effort like that. So long tune-up races like a half marathon, like a 25K or a 20K, or even a 10-mile road race, these races are long enough to practically be considered long runs, but they're also stressful enough that we don't want to combine them with a long run. When you have a fast, hard day followed up with a long, somewhat hard day, and that's your long run, the recipe for injury is pretty good right there, because what you're doing is you're doing 2 hard days in a row. You're really putting yourself out on the line on Saturday during that tune-up race and then trying to come back for a long run the next day when you've already run a lot and run hard is a recipe for injury. I don't want that to happen to you. But what if your tune-up race is a 5K? Let's say you're getting ready for a half marathon and you plan a 5K tune-up race, and it's on Saturday. Can you run your long run on Sunday? In this example, I say absolutely. First, the 5K is not like a long run. It is much shorter than that. You're never going to get a similar long run stimulus with a 5K. The other reason is because you're going to be able to recover much faster from a 5K than you are from a half marathon or a similar distance event. The 5K is an event where after a couple days, you're going to feel back to normal. So the following day, as long as you don't run too much volume on your 5K race day, so maybe a 2-mile warm-up, 2-mile cool down, that's it. You've only run about 7 miles for the day. And the following day, you can follow that race up with your long run. This is an example where you can definitely do that. Now, we run into some tricky situations when the race isn't as long as a half, but it's not as short as a 5K. Let's say you are running a 10K or maybe a 12K, a little bit more of an offbeat distance. In other words, some distance between 8K and 10 miles. Here we get into a situation where, yes, you are absolutely going to be running hard. It's a very stressful day in terms of intensity, but you're also running a fair amount of volume. So if you run a 10K and you do a 2-mile warm-up and a 2-mile cool down, you'll have run more than 10 miles. Now, if you're someone who's running very high mileage, you're running 70 miles a week or 80 miles a week or more, then you can run a 10-mile day and then do your long run the next day. But if you're like most runners, you're not running 10 miles a day on average, that 10-mile day might be close to your long run distance. And so in this example, I don't know if a long run the following day might actually be a good idea. Here, we may want to just replace the long run with the race, with one little caveat. Let's do a slightly longer cool down. So, for example, let's say you're running a 10K tune-up race, but your goal race is also 10K. You might be running 12 to 15 miles as your long run. So when you do a 10K tune-up race with a 2-mile warm-up and a 2-mile cool down, you're getting more than 10 miles in for the day. That's close to the 12 to 15 miles you had typically been doing for just a long run. So in this example, I might run a slightly longer cool down of maybe 3 or 4 miles, bringing the total mileage for the day to 11 to 12 miles. It's a relatively short long run compared with what you had been doing, but you're replacing some of that volume with intensity. You're doing a 10K race that adds a lot more stress. So we want to make up for that by reducing the total volume for the day. And you can do that with a slightly longer cool down, but then that day acts as your long run. You can replace a long run with a day like this. You're not going to lose any fitness. In fact, you're going to need that extra recovery from the tune-up race to help you recover from the race, but also to adapt from it. So you will come back stronger, fitter, and ready to tackle your goal race at your goal pace. So ultimately, this question really boils down to how long is the tune-up race and how long are your typical long runs? Because if the long run is a more moderate distance of maybe say around 15 miles, you're not going for the 20-mile super long runs like if you're training for a marathon. But if you do a tune-up race that's long enough, you're going to be covering a very similar distance as those long runs. So in those cases, let's just replace the long run with the tune-up race. But if the tune-up race is really short, then we can do both. We can do the race one day and then the long run the next day. And finally, if it's somewhere in the middle, we can take a hybrid approach. Let's do a slightly longer cool down so you're doing somewhat of a similar distance as your long run, but you're really prioritizing the race itself. And then the following day, you're just doing some easy recovery running instead of a long run. I hope this was helpful for you. JT, thank you so much for the question. Don't miss our season planner worksheet, which I'm going to link up to in a card and then also underneath this video, which goes into some more detail about how you plan tune-up races, what distance they should be, and at what spacing interval they should be throughout the training cycle. Because you certainly don't want them too early and you don't want them right next to your goal race. So I hope it's helpful for you. And in the meantime, if you have any questions for me, leave them under this video. I'm happy to help.